Consult your doctor before beginning any exercise or skill development program. The producers, participants, and distributors of this program disclaim any liabilities or loss in connection with the information presented in this product.
Hi, my name's Hank Schrader, and I'm here on behalf of Gridiron Strategies and the top coaches of the Nation Series. Today, I'm going to talk to you about a title called Defensive Plans. In my coaching career, I've coached in 3 different states. I've been fortunate enough to be a head coach and a defensive coordinator in Wisconsin, the defensive coordinator of the Bellevue Wolverines. We won the state title when I was a defensive coordinator in 2001, and finally a defensive coordinator in the state of Texas at Westbury High School. It's a privilege and an honor to be here, and what I hope to do for you today, gentlemen, is to make you a better football coach by giving you at least one item that will make you a better coach, or affirm the stuff that you have already are doing and know that it's correct. So let's get on to my presentation, Defensive Plans. My topic today is defensive plans. I've been a defensive coordinator for several years with many different teams, and I really enjoyed writing this article. And I hope that you're going to learn something today about defensive plans. To help you along with this, let's talk about my topics today. First of all, we're going to talk about defensive principles, how to design a dynamic defense, and third, what are the components of a good defensive game plan. When we talk about defensive principles, the key thing to me, in my mind, is alignment. The defense must be effectively aligned to counter the offense. And what we're talking about here are gaps and account for all of the receivers. Next, we've got to be able to use the keys to get to the defense in the correct area to counter the offensive attack. And finally, we've got to use the right technique by the defensive players so that they can execute their responsibility. Now, there's a whole bunch of different styles of play, and as defensive coaches, these different styles of play can come into your game, can be part of it, or they can be used as a single type deal. For example, let's talk about different alignments. We could be in a 4-3, cover 3. Basically, that talks about 4 linemen, 3 linebackers, and a 3 deep shell. Or we could be in a 4-3 cover 2, any type of alignment. The different types of defensive techniques that we're going to use could affect our style of play. We could be a below delivery, gap step team, or we could be a penetrating type defense. We could only use a base alignment, such as a 52 monster, where we bring up that strong safety and put him up in an area where he can affect that line of scrimmage and come up with an 8-man gap. We could be a multiple defensive team. We could go from a 3-4 to a 4-3 to a 4-4, all of those different types, and use different types of defensive back coverages. We could be a great pursuing defense, a defense that gets after that ball carrier and after they've covered their gaps, runs to the football and effectively tackles the opponent. We could be a penetrating type of defense where we blow right into that different types of gaps, going after and attacking the offensive players. Or we could be a pressure defense where we get out and blitz our opponents. And last but not least, we could be a read and react. Now, the style of play is not as important as the different types of play and techniques that you use are not quite as important as the end result, and that's how your players execute on the field. So how do we design a dynamic defense? So how do we design a dynamic defense? I think first of all, we got to win the ground war. So let's take a look at what we got to do. Some teams can beat you in the air, but every team can beat you on the ground. Let me give you an example. In a state playoff game where I was fortunate enough to play in the quarterfinals in Bellevue, Washington, team threw for 369 yards against us. They got 0 yards on the ground. We won the game 42-24. A basic rule to stop the run game, you got to cover all 8 of the gaps. Now, you have 2 ways that you can go about this. You can either have a single gap defense or you can play 2 gap. I like playing single gap, especially at the high school level. And the final thing is I want to get 8 men in the box. And what I mean by the box is I'm talking from tackle to tackle. If I can get 8 men around the line of scrimmage, we're going to be successful. Let's talk about proper alignment. Every player must play together as a unit. The front 7 and 8 must play their assigned run gap first, pass second, unless the scouting report indicates otherwise. Every player must align correctly on each defense. And the front 7 or 8 must keep their shoulders square to the line of scrimmage, play their gap in doubt, then find the football. Let's talk what gap responsibility really means. Once a player determines the ball is coming towards them, they must play their assigned gap. If the ball goes away from them, then what we want to do is pursue at the correct angle. Talk for a moment about our D gap or the outside gap players. These players have reverse responsibility if the flow is away, in other words, the ball goes away from them, or if the ball is coming to them, they must maintain outside leverage and keep the ball inside, keeping their outside arm and leg free. When in doubt, play your gap. Now, we're going to talk about the different responsibilities of the D-line, the linebackers, and the defensive backs. The D-line has the first opportunity to stop it. Stance, charge, and reaction are critical. They key the ball. They must control their gap, keep the offensive linemen off the linebackers, and defeat the blocks. Style of play can be read or react, where they react to movement, or it can be a penetrating type technique. I personally prefer a technique where you penetrate 18 inches to the other side of the offensive lineman's heels, then find the ball. Now let's talk about our linebackers. Linebackers are the backbone of the defense. They have a difficult job because they've got to stop the run and the pass. They've got to be great tacklers. And they've got to align themselves and arrive at the ball in such a manner that they play with reckless abandon within the scope of their responsibilities. Thing to remember is most plays are designed to fool linebackers, and so they must be disciplined to do their job and react quickly to their keys. So let's talk about linebacker keys here for a second. Okay. When we're talking about the linebacker keys, they can key a lineman, a back, or through a lineman to a back. I personally prefer the technique of keying backs. Here's how I do it. First of all, where you can near key, meaning the closest back to you is the back that you key, cross key, the farthest back away from you, or in an I formation, I go fullback to tailback because the fullback always leads you to the ball, or you can use a man key. This is a spy technique. Wherever that back goes, you go. Key technique's preference doesn't really matter as long as the key gets the linebacker quickly to the running back. Let's talk a little bit about defensive backs. Defensive backs are the last line of defense. They have to be skilled, intelligent players who don't make mistakes. They use a variety of techniques: man-to-man, zone. They could be loose or tight, deep or shallow, inverted. There are all kinds of different techniques and disguise techniques that you can use with your backs. But whatever you do with them, they must have ironclad rules to reduce their mistakes. Now let's talk a little bit about some defensive back keys. Defensive backs key receivers. They play pass first and then the run. If man, they key only their man, focusing on that midsection of the receiver in front of them. If zone, they defend their zone by looking for the primary receiver to the secondary receiver. And here's what I mean. There's the primary receiver. That's going to be my first threat. I keep my head on a swivel looking for the secondary man who may be coming into my zone. Once the D-back is certain it's a run, they can come up and support in their proper position. Corners support outside in, safeties inside out. Here's a great example of one of my defensive backs in a state championship playoff game making an interception at the highest point. You may note that they threw into a disguised double coverage, but this is great defensive back play, and this is what it's all about when you're trying to teach those ironclad rules to your defense. The next thing we're going to talk about are 9 tips for a sound defense. The first thing that I think will really help you if you teach blocking progressions. If you're not familiar with what a blocking progression is, it's where the most likely offensive player is going to come and attack your defense. Think every good defense, quarterback, the dive, and the pitch. I think you need to develop special packages for special situations. I'm going to show you an example here in just a second. We're going to talk about a special situation bunch here. These are our 3 offensive players. This is the line of scrimmage. Now, the reason I picked this particular example is to show you one of the principles I believe in. If you don't know how to handle special situations, try matching the offensive formation with your defensive alignment. In this particular case, what we're going to do is we're going to bump and play trail technique on the lead receiver. The lead receiver's job is basically to either do a quick pick while the other receivers cut off here, or to create some type of interference. By bumping this receiver, we're significantly going to destroy their original intent and the timing of that. The other 2 players are going to play zone until these 2 receivers commit. If the receivers all go off in this area, our 2 players pick them up man for man once they're clear. If they cross, this player will take this individual, this player will take this receiver. And this is just an example of how you face special situations and things that you must do to be successful on the football field. One of the other things that you're going to have to be able to do to be successful is you got to stop the big play. We know that those situations occur during a game. We can't let them throw down deep on you or break a long run if you want to be successful on defense. You got to know your players' limitations. Let me give you an example. I designed a game plan which we executed perfectly in practice. Yet, when I got my players out on the field during the game, all of a sudden they were slow and unsure. I went back to my base defense and we won the game. You have to be able to develop a sound pass defense that does, first of all, you limit the quarterback's time to throw. You must take away some of his receivers or reduce the area that those receivers can get the ball at and reduces the area that they can throw to. Now, just a simple thing like teaching your lineman to raise the hand can alter where a team passes to. You got to be able to bring the blitz, and you got to be able to bring it at the right time when the offensive team can least effectively block it. You got to be able to mix up your coverage. I believe that you have to have some kind of disguised coverage, either give them a perfect cover 2 look and slide to a cover 3, or just the opposite, give them the cover 3 look, slide to a cover 2, or use some combo coverages. And finally, your team has to be prepared to stop screen passes. Now let's talk about how we're going to design a defensive game plan. Here are the 8 steps that we're going to use to design a defensive game plan. First of all, we're going to size up the opponent. Secondly, we're going to study some film. Third, we're going to analyze the computer printout after we put it in the computer. Step 4, we're going to evaluate how they play the game. And finally, we're going to develop the game plan. Then, we're going to inform our players, and that's probably the most critical step right here, and execute the game plan. So let's talk about step number 1, sizing up the opponents. First thing I think you have to do is to know some stuff about them. And when I mean stuff about them, I'm talking about points per game, passing yards, rushing yards, turnovers. Then you got to know something about the intangibles. Do you have to win this game defensively? If your team can only score 30 points and your opponents are averaging 40 points, you better come up with something that's going to limit them to less than 30 points if you want to win the ball game. Is it an intense rivalry? Rivalry games causes a lot of emotion and up and downs. Make sure that you're prepared for those different types of games. And are you guys playing well or poorly? Now, after the intangibles, you got to do some film study. Look here. Film study is probably the most tedious part of this whole process. I believe you need to do at least 2 or 3 films if you want to be effective as a high school coach. I've actually done up to 15, but that was a special situation. We've never been able to beat this team, and we took a look at every game they played the previous year and the 3 or 4 that they played in that year. But 2 to 3 will suffice in most instances. You need to diagram each one of these plays. In a high school game, you're going to get 40 plays to 60 plays. If they're running 60 plays, they're beating you pretty good, or they're beating their opponents pretty well. And the goal is to get at least 100 plays in the computer. Let's think about what our goals are for scouting. First of all, defense is a guessing game. A good scouting report will give you the advantage to help your players to identify formations and the likely plays from those formations. Then, each D player must know his alignment, his responsibility on each formation. And last but not least, must know how this formation affects him and his teammates. Now let's talk about some tips for studying opponents. First of all, you got to be prepared to work. What I mean by that is you're going to put in 18 to 24 hours on film study to do a really good job, and also your data entry. So my suggestion is, if you can get ahead in any way at all, such as if it's the same type of team that you played last year and they haven't had many personnel changes, maybe you can use a last year's film, okay? Maybe you can get some stuff in early with some early scouting reports. Anything that you can put in the computer early will help you in this regard. You got to keep good records. I always try to keep excellent records of diagram plays, last year's stats, anything that will help cut my preparation time. Word processing is another really good idea, and computer scouting reports. But you can never forget about scouting live. I once saw a team where the players were shouting at their coaches. No discipline. To study film effectively, you really have to do two things. Number one, you want to know what happened on the play. And second, and most important, why it happened. Now, you got to look for the little things. How do the plays come in? What's the cadence? All can be game changers. Let me give you an example. One opponent that I played had a quarterback that ran to the sidelines every time to get the play. They had no other way to send in the play. I started shadowing that quarterback on my side of the line of scrimmage. Their whole system for calling offensive plays broke down. And finally, do they have heart? Will they stand up in adversity and be counted? You're going to analyze your computer printout. And basically, what the computer printout is going to give you is down and distances. Okay, it's going to tell you what they do on first, second, third, and fourth down, and it's going to break it down in second and third on long, short, and medium. We're also going to study the field zones, and I'm going to show you the field zones here in just a second on the board. There are 4 field zones on a football field, and what we talk about, these are the vertical field zones. The danger zone is from the 0 or your goal line to the -30. The transition zone is the -31 to the 50. The offensive zone is from the 50 to the 21, and finally the red zone is the 20 on in for your score. When you analyze the data on the run game, you want to look at the 10 running holes. Some of you will only be using 8, but it's pretty much the same thing. And we're going to talk about yards gained and who carried the ball. When you study the passing zone, we're going to study the 9 passing zones and the passing game with the number thrown, completed, and who caught the ball. Let me show you some examples now. Here's an example of the running holes. I use a system of odd and even, with 8 being the outside hole, 6 the off-tackle hole, the tackle hole, guard hole, center, and the same going to the right-hand side of the formation. Now, you may not be familiar with the different passing zones, but let me show you how I break them down. Behind the line of scrimmage, I use a zone to the left, center, and right, 1, 2, and 3. And over the line of scrimmage, I use 4, 5, and 6. Sometimes this is 10 yards. On other teams, all the way to 15 yards. And then finally, the 3 deep zones, 7, 8, and 9. Now let me show you what I do with this on the report. Let's say that they threw 4 times into this zone, but only completed once. They never threw the ball in here. And finally, they completed 3 out of 3. Now we're getting a pretty good picture that they go to the boundaries when they throw the ball. Perhaps they don't throw here, twice here, 0 completions, 3 times, 3 completions. Now what this tells me is this is the short receiver in this area, the deep threat is over here, and I can design my game plan appropriately. Step 4, we're going to evaluate how they play the game. And the goal here is to look at different situations. When do they change their attack? Why do they change their attack? Do they use motion? Is it a key? Let me give you a great example of something I did against one team. This particular team used a run and shoot formation, and they brought their star running back across the formation to block. We realized we could blitz right behind him because he was a weak blocker. Our design was so effective, and this was the only thing they did from this formation. Our design was so effective. You want to study the pass game in detail and then rate the opponent's players. We're going to develop a game plan. And here's where the coach puts in the defensive alignments that they're going to use on the defensive game plans. Most game plans are designed by down and distances, and they include formations and vertical field tendencies. I'm going to show you an example of a game plan now. This is an example of a game plan. This is an actual game plan I used in the state playoff games versus Ferndale High School. This area right here is the down and distance is their favorite plays in blue, and in red what I have done is described what defense that I'm going to call to give me the best advantage for those types of situations. The plan's organized with first down, second down, long, medium, short, third down, long, medium, and short, and finally, fourth down. In the middle of my play call sheet, I have data on their formations and the most likely plays from those formations. Many times this can give you a significant advantage if they only run 1 or 2 or 3 plays from a set formation. The bottom part contains the data on the vertical field position. This tells me what changes a team might make during the different various zones that they face. Finally, I have some data about adjustments because of hash marks or hash marks on the right or on the left, and I take a look at some data right here concerning best defenses for some situations. I list their key players in the remarks section, and I have the offensive linemen down in this box here. Last but not least, I put key reminders to myself right here. Now, the trick with all of the stuff in developing a game plan is you got to get it down on one sheet that's usable so you can quickly decide what is the best defense to call in a given situation. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to tell our players, and this is probably the most important part of the entire scouting process. Here's an example of a defensive fact sheet that I used to tell my players some items about the opponents they're going to play. This is really not quite as important as some of the next diagrams and different forms that I'm going to show you. What the players really want to know is who do they face, what's their number, and how much do they weigh. Even more importantly is you want to take a look at the formations and the likely plays that you're going to see from these formations. Again, this helps your players identify what they're going to face so they can be successful in defeating it. You also want to include to your players diagrams of the various plays that run so that they can study it. Because in certain situations, they're going to see different formations, and I'm very, very comfortable with knowing what the opponent's going to do. Also, this is going to help you prepare your scout team with these plays so you can practice against them live. as you can see, I covered all of those things by showing you those documents. The personnel page, the offensive formation, their top 10 running and passing plays. The final thing you want to show them is a special teams sheet that covers the unique things that they may be doing on special teams. In this example that I have right here, we've got a kickoff, the kickoff return, punt, and punt return, and their point after touchdown. Notice in this particular example, they use a swinging gate, so it was important for me to identify exactly where I wanted my players to line up to counter the offensive formation. Now, we're going to talk about designing a practice plan. This is the practice plan that I've used very successfully with 3 different teams. And on Saturday, what you're going to do is you're going to lift. You're going to watch the last night's game, introduce your opponent, and then break down your film. Sunday, finish your film breakdown of your new opponent. Put the plays in the computer and prepare the scouting report. Also, you may need to grade your players. At the high school level, sometimes you don't have time to get that done. On Monday, you want to teach any new defenses in pre-practice, or you do a formation alignment drill. What that is, we'll bring out the opponent's formations, and our defense lines up correctly on each one of the different formations they're going to face that week. Then we do individual drill periods. Finally, 7-on-7 inside run drill, lift, and film. Continuing on to Tuesday, what we're going to do is 7-on-7 run and pass drills, outside run attack, a full contact team defense scripted. Let me show you what I'm talking about in that. In this particular sheet, what I've done is I've listed the exact play I want run, the number of the play, and then the defense that we're going to run against that. You can also do that in groups, and in this case, I'm working 7-on-7, and you can do this in the team where you actually add in the different zones, like we're going to on Wednesday. Let's take a look at Wednesday's practice. It's a team defensive day. We're going to look at field zone plays scripted live. Again, I use the same sheet that I'd used before. The only difference is this time I incorporate things such as punts, PATs, and other items so that our teams have to react to special teams items along with their defensive responsibilities. Okay? By now, you should have had your opponent's plays run 10 different times against your defense. You're going to lift, and you're going to look at a little bit of film. Thursday is a review day. You're in shells, and you run every opponent's plays versus the bags and the shields. The idea here is to look for any last-minute problems, and test players on the scouting report, team dinner. Friday is game day. It doesn't matter what routine you follow, just as long as you can teach your players how to execute so they can win the ball game. The critical point, executing the game plan. In pregame, you want to make sure that you remind the players of their defensive matchups, any special defenses that you're going to run that week, and automatics. In other words, when the team goes into motion, how are we going to adjust? We're going to review our defensive signals. You got to make sure that the linebackers or your defensive backs know exactly what the call is going to be. You want to thank your players for their sacrifice and dedication. Let them know how proud you are of them. And we're going to review the 9 defensive keys for victory. The first one is we want to create turnovers. We want to prevent the bombs, plays of 25 yards or more. We want to have successful goal line stands. Prevent them getting in from a touchdown, force them to a field goal, or better yet, prevent a score completely. We want to eliminate mental errors. Anytime we can create minus yards on plays, we're going to be successful. We want to eliminate foolish penalties. We want to win the kicking game. We want to be able to stop our opponents after turnovers. Sudden change is a very important part of football, and if you train your players correctly, they will respond to that challenge. And finally, we want to win the big play. Final pre-game exact routine, and they know what that routine is. My suggestion is you hide any special defenses so that will help keep the surprise until the game. During the actual game itself, you want to chart every play that your opponent runs. After each defensive series, what you want to do is check out their run and pass percentage. You want to make sure that the sheet tendencies are correct on your call sheet, because if they've changed, then you're in a completely different ball game. Position coaches look for alignment, assignment, technique, and execution on each play. They must identify and eliminate mistakes. And finally, you have to anticipate the 5 or 6 big plays that are going to occur during a game and get special effort out of your players on those plays. Now, what do you do at halftime? What were their most successful plays? Why were they successful? What do we need to do to win this ball game? You need both coach and player input. I usually huddle very quickly with my coaches as I'm going off the field or just before and the last 2 minutes, and then get your players' input, especially your players who understand the game and can give you valuable information on how to make adjustments and check for injuries. Now, the final thing in any game plan, you need to be humble in victory, resolute in defeat, but always let your pad do your talking, not your mouth. Show class and respect for your opponents. I'd like to leave you with one last thought. Football is not a lifetime game. It's a once-in-a-lifetime experience. But just remember, it's a game. Good luck and have great coaching.